everybody, let's welcome our final storyteller of this slam, Richard Engelhardt.
Like this? Oh, that's bright. Okay. Here. Okay. So in 2010, I was living in San Francisco. It was probably April, I think. And I was sitting down to brunch with this guy I was seeing for a little while, and we were having a conversation where you start to reveal vulnerabilities and kind of show yourself and have a little bonding moment. And by the time I had finished telling him one particular story, I realized, oh, I shouldn't have told him that. That was my blunder. I told him about the story when I was kicked by a horse when I was a very little kid. I was around 3 years old. I was on a family trip to St. Lucia, and one day in our hotel room on the ground floor, I saw through the sliding glass windows a horse go by in a field. And I said, "Oh, Mommy, can I go see the horse?" I might have said horsey, I don't know. And she said, "Yeah," and then I bolted. She might have also said, "But wait for me," but I was already gone. And I approached the horse, and it was facing away from me, and I reached out to touch it, like its hind leg. And then the next thing I remember is laying on my back, looking at the sky. I turned my head to the left, and someone was running toward me. I think it was my dad. And years later, I'm told that when they saw me fly 20 feet, about 6 feet off the ground. Maybe 5, I don't know. And my face was blue, my lips were blue, and I couldn't breathe because the wind had been knocked out of me, and my mouth was full of grass and dirt blocking my airway. So I was rushed to a hospital. And the only thing I remember there is that I was given a glass of water to swish my mouth, and out came all the grass and dirt. And I would thought, what? What's that? So, and then we went home shortly after that. It was toward the end of the trip. And I never told that story to anyone. Mostly as a little kid, I was the one that they were throwing rocks at, throwing food at, shoving into walls, calling any name you could come up with and just bullying me as in any way they could imagine. So I knew that if they knew this story, they would use it against me. It would lead to nicknames that would stick or a catchphrase that wouldn't go away, and it would be a constant reminder of how I'm wrong. And so I knew I couldn't do that because they had enough ammunition on their own. In middle school, I continued with that fear, and I realized they would probably say something like, "Oh, that's where it all went wrong. That explains everything. That's why you're broken." Once I got to college, that fear was still there, but it was greatly minimized. I still didn't tell that story to anyone, mostly because it was, you're out at parties meeting people, and no one ever asks you, "Hey, have you ever been kicked by a horse?" It just never came up. And so when I progressed into adulthood, I still hadn't told that story, maybe because a little bit of the fear, mostly because it just never came up. But when I was sitting at brunch with James, I told him the story. It was the first time I've ever told it to anyone. And his reaction was, "Oh, that explains it." And I couldn't believe that after nearly 30 years of fearing this moment that it happened, I thought, there's no way this would ever happen, and it did, from someone I was falling in love with. And we didn't last too much longer after that as a couple. Not because of his reaction, but because he was sleeping with about 24 other people on the side. There were suddenly a lot of birthday parties that I wasn't allowed to go to, and I was like, yeah, I put it all together afterward. Yeah. But the reason why he didn't deserve to know that story is because he didn't deserve to know who I was, because he wasn't respecting who I am. And so that's why I regret making that blunder with him. I still don't tell that story to people, but it's completely no longer because I'm afraid or ashamed. it really is only because no one ever asks, hey, have you ever been kicked by a horse? Thank you.